This is every change between every generation of Pokemon, Part 2. So first off, I really did not expect such a positive and huge reaction to the first video, so I gotta start out by saying thank you so much for that. And if you want to see a third part, be sure to leave a comment telling me anything I missed here in this video, and maybe leave a like. Okay, and lastly, before getting into the video, the format for this second part is going to be a little bit different than the first because, you know, variety is the spice of life or whatever. So in this one, I'm going to be diving much deeper into just a few specific topics, such as the item bag or the Safari Zone and how they've specifically evolved between generations. Alright, that's enough intro, let's get into the video. The bag is something I somehow completely forgot to mention in part 1, so let's start with its inception in Generation 1, where it exists in its most primitive form, a simple menu screen that displays up to 20 different items that you can carry without any form of pockets or separation except for the distinction between key items and normal items. Each item you get can stack up to 99, and if you go over 99 of an item you can still get it, but it will start a new stack and take up another one of your 20 total slots. Though if you already have your 20 slots filled, you cannot receive any new items. Well, without glitches anyway. By using item duplication glitches, you can actually go over the 99 items in one slot limit and carry up to 255. Then comes Gen 2 when the bag gets quite the upgrade. It's still a menu, but now you actually get a cool little visual representation of your bag. And whenever you're in a particular pocket, that pocket will be highlighted on the image. I don't know, I think it's pretty cool. Speaking of pockets, it has 4 different ones. One for Pokeballs, one for key items, one for TMs and HMs, and then one for the rest of all your junk, just labeled items. And even better yet, all of these pockets are large enough to carry every item of their type. Well, that is, except for the general item pocket, which is still limited to just 20 slots of 99. Also new this generation is whenever you hover over an item in your bag, it'll give you a little description about what it is. For example, when you hover over this white Apricorn, it gives you the description, a white Apricorn. How useful. Moving on to Ruby and Sapphire's bags, you have the same pockets as Gen 2, but also one more, the Berries pocket. And yes, I'm gonna talk about berries in depth later in this video, which is another topic I somehow completely missed in part 1. The male and female playable characters each have their own unique bag design. The general item pocket can now hold 30 items, up from the previous 20, and you can hold 10 times more of each item, a big old 999, which is up from the previous 99. Now, instead of a pocket just being highlighted in the visual representation, in Gen 3, the pocket actually opens up. I mean, talk about immersion. And then in Fire Red and Leaf Green, there were some additional changes, such as the general items pocket being able to carry 42 different items as opposed to the 30 in Ruby and Sapphire. They added images to go along with the item description when you're hovering over an item in the bag. And for whatever reason, they decided to get rid of the TMs and HMs and berries pouches, so there are only 3 pockets in Fire Red and Leaf Green. And you use the key items TM case and berry pouches to store TMs, HMs, and berries in this game instead. Okay, and then in Gen 4, the bag's got a pretty big revamp. There is now no limit as to how many items you can carry, it's just a black hole in there. But you can still only have 999 of any one particular item. There are 3 more pockets than there were in Ruby and Sapphire, with the addition of the medicine, mail, and battle items pockets. Pockets went back to being highlighted instead of actually being open while you're in the bag menu, like in Gen 2, rest in peace to immersion. But in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, you actually see a sprite of the player character with their bag on, and the pocket being highlighted while in the bag menu. And moving on to Black and White, where I guess they thought 8 pockets were just a little bit too wacky, so they condensed it back down into 5 pockets like in Emerald. But, and this is a very important distinction, they're not called pockets this time, they're cases. The 3 pockets that were removed were Pokeballs, mail, and battle items. They're all in the general items case now. There's also a symbol to the left of held items, mail, and Pokeballs in the item case to differentiate them. New sorting options were added, such as how you can automatically sort an entire case just by pressing start, and whichever case you're looking through now shows it being open again. I mean, man, they really couldn't decide on whether or not to keep this feature. Then in Black and White 2, they added a 6th case labeled Free Space. You can put items that you use most often in here for easy access by avoiding all the clutter of your black hole items case. Now on to X and Y, where Game Freak decided that the new Free Space pocket that they just added was actually stupid and dumb, so they removed it, which brings the amount of pockets in the bag back down to 5. You can now use the touchscreen and stylus to manually sort the items in your bag. You can click on this clock icon to see a list of the last 12 items you used, making navigating to your most commonly used items a bit easier. You can rearrange the order that the different pockets are presented in, and then they got rid of that visual representation of the bag while you're in its menu, which brings us back full circle to it just being a list of items. Though I guess your character does have a bag on them in the overworld, you just don't see it while actually looking through the bag, funnily enough. And yeah, that's about it for Gen 6. On to Sun and Moon, where they immediately got rid of the useful looking back at the past 12 items used function and being able to reorder your pockets. Yay. But I suppose Game Freak decided that they actually did like the free space pocket from Black and White 2 because it's back, baby. There's also a new pocket for Z crystals, bringing the total pockets of the bag in Gen 7 to, well, 7. And due to the fact that HMs were removed, the TMs and HMs pocket is now just the TMs pocket. And then in Ultra Sun and Moon, an 8th pocket was added to store your Rotom powers, the Rotom powers pocket. And then in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, the bag changed quite a bit due to the far fewer kinds of unique items in the game. There are 8 pockets in your bag: the Pokemon box, medicine pocket, TM case, candy jar, power-up pocket, clothing trunk, catching pocket, the battle pocket, and then everything else is just kind of listed below. Moving on to Sword and Shield, the bag has a whopping 9 pockets for medicine, Pokeballs, battle items, berries, TMs, treasures, ingredients, key items, and the pocket for all the other items. The free space pocket was removed and replaced by the ability to mark an item as a favorite and sort that pocket so that favorites are set to the top. In Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, the visual representation of the bag returns, look at that, and with only losing the ingredients pocket, as there isn't actually curry to make in the games. And the bag shown in the menu now actually changes to match how you've customized it in trainer customization. And then in Legends Arceus, the bag is as simple as we've seen it in a very long time. It's just a grid menu that lists all of the items you have with just 2 different categories: everyday items and key items. But in Scarlet and Violet, you've got one hell of a bag. This thing has 10 different pockets with the addition of the TM materials pocket, and the ability to manually reorder items was replaced by a more in-depth automatic sort feature, which allows you to sort your bag in 4 different ways. Sort by type, or number for TMs, sort by name, newest item first, and favorite item first. But aside from that, the bag is very similar to how it was in Sword and Shield. And that's about all that I've got for the evolution of the item bag. Alright, next let's talk about something else, something a little bit more wild. The Safari Zone. So the Safari Zone was also first introduced in Gen 1. It's found just north of Fuchsia City, and for the low cost of just 500 Pokebucks, you can play the Safari game. This will give you 30 special little Safari balls and a limit of 500 steps, after which the game ends. This zone is unique in that when you get into a wild Pokemon battle, you don't actually use the Pokemon in your party to beat the wild Pokemon into submission. No, you don't use your own Pokemon at all, in fact. Instead of your Pokemon, your own player character stands in opposition to the wild Pokemon. And these battles can be kind of, well, frustrating, and that's because the wild Pokemon can just run away at any time. And to make matters worse, the only tools that you're equipped with to catch these Pokemon are a rock, bait, and Pokeballs. So if you throw bait, the Pokemon becomes less likely to run away, but it is harder to catch. And if you throw a rock, the Pokemon becomes more likely to run away, but easier to catch. And yeah, that's kind of the gist of the Safari Zone. You get some time to run around in this sectioned off wild area to try and catch Pokemon until you run out of steps or you run out of Safari Balls. Then after Gen 1's Safari Zone, the next time we see it is in Gen 3's Ruby and Sapphire. And it's pretty similar, but differences include there being 6 areas as opposed to 3 areas in Gen 1. Instead of throwing bait, you now throw Pokeblocks, and instead of throwing rocks, you simply move closer. I guess Game Freak decided they didn't want to encourage kids to throw rocks at animals or something, I don't know. But functionally, these 2 options work about the same as their Gen 1 counterparts. But in Fire Red and Leaf Green, it does go back to throwing rocks though, so I don't know. Also in Fire Red and Leaf Green, you get 600 steps in the Safari Zone instead of the typical 500. And the Safari Zone comes back in the next generation, Gen 4, in Diamond and Pearl, though this time it's called the Great Marsh. Your options in a battle here slightly differ once again. You can throw bait, a Safari Ball, run away, or now throw mud. Mud, however, works functionally the same as throwing rocks and moving closer, just less violent, I guess. Interestingly, the same Pokemon don't appear in the same areas every day in the Great Marsh. For each of the 6 areas, a random Pokemon from a set list will be chosen to appear in each area of the marsh in addition to the Pokemon that are always found there. And whichever one is chosen from this list for each area only has a 10% encounter rate, and the same Pokemon can even be chosen to appear in multiple different areas on the same day. Which means if you want to find a Pokemon from this list in the Safari Zone, it can be kind of frustratingly dependent on luck. And this list of Pokemon that appear in the Safari Zone also changes once you obtain the National Dex. And I just thought this was funny, but there was a programming error for Wishcash in the Safari Zone. He actually doesn't have a flea rate program. programmed. So it only has a 1 in 255 chance of escaping each turn, which is significantly lower than the average. He's just chilling. And then Johto got a Safari Zone for the first time in Heart Gold and Soul Silver after being an absent feature from the original games and is located northwest of Cyanwood. And man, they really added quite a few features to this one in typical Johto fashion, I guess. This Safari Zone is unique firstly in that there is no time limit or step limit. The only way for the game to end is if you end it yourself or if you run out of Safari Balls. There are yet again 6 different areas in the Johto Safari Zone, but this time you can actually customize their layout. This is useful because it means if you want to just go to the furthest area from the entrance, you don't have to run through all the areas that you don't actually care about. You can just move the one that you want to go to closer to you. And of these 6 areas, each one can be one of 12 different kind of zones. Like either a swamp, a plains, a mountain. Suddenly this is kind of starting to sound like Magic the Gathering, huh? But yeah, you could customize those however you want. And then also new to this Safari Zone is the ability to place down objects within areas. And these objects, depending on which different types you place, will actually bring in different kinds of Pokemon to the areas. And that's the Johto Safari Zone. Also worth noting is that the Safari Zone did not come back in Gen 6's Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire or Gen 7's Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. The Great Marsh did, however, come back in Gen 8's Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, and I already mentioned that there was a Safari Zone in Gen 3's Kanto remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green. And that's it for Safari Zones. Now let's talk about something a little bit juicier. That's right, berries. Berries were introduced in Gen 2's Gold and Silver, complementary to the new Held Items mechanic. When a berry is given to a Pokemon to hold, the Pokemon will consume it during battle when a specific condition is met. For example, your Pokemon automatically will consume its Berry once its HP falls below 50%, healing it for 10 HP. Or your Pokemon will automatically consume its Paralyze Cure Berry, that's all one word by the way, when it becomes paralyzed. And yeah, they really didn't put too much effort into naming these berries, did they? But there were 10 different berries introduced here with berry trees spread all across the Kanto and Johto regions. Each of these trees will give you 1 berry every day, regrowing their harvest at midnight. And you know what, I suppose we could bring up Apricorns in this berry section given their similarities. They were also introduced in Generation 2 and are also found on trees, though they are much more rare as you can only get 1 of each of them per day. And you can give these Apricorns to this dude named Kurt, and he will turn them into unique types of Pokeballs for you by the next day. For example, red Apricorns will be turned into level balls, and black Apricorns will be turned into heavy balls. And I'm not gonna make a joke about heavy balls. In Gold and Silver, he can only make 1 Pokeball at a time, but starting in a Crystal version, he can make multiples depending on how many Apricorns you give him. Apricorns also don't make any appearances in Gen 3, but the berry mechanic was pretty heavily expanded upon in Ruby and Sapphire. The total amount of berries was more than quadrupled, as there are 43 different berries that you can have at any one time. I word it like this because there are technically 55 different berries total in Generation 3, but 12 of these berries are locked behind the e-reader, which is a peripheral device that was released for the GBA. Depending on the e-reader card you scan, you can have 1 of these berries in your game, but only 1 at a time. The moment you scan a new e-reader card, all of the data for the previous one you scanned is lost. So we'll just say there are 43 different berries in the game, counting the Enigma berry and all of the e-reader berries as 1. Though speaking of the Enigma berry, it can't actually be legitimately obtained in the game, it's just intended to be used as a placeholder for the e-reader berries. And even then, 6 of these 12 e-reader berries were only released in Japan. So just to be very clear, there are 42 different berries in game, the Enigma berry placeholder, and then the 12 different e-reader berries. Add it all up and you get 43 berries, okay? The 10 berries from Gen 2 all return in Gen 3, but with some more thought-provoking names. Then there are 5 new berries that will restore a Pokemon's HP when their HP falls down below 25%, though it will confuse them depending on what kind of food they don't like. Which I suppose would make now a good time to talk about Gen 3's new flavor mechanic. Pokemon each have 1 dislike and 1 like of certain flavors depending on their nature, represented by this chart. The 5 flavors are spicy, dry, sweet, bitter, and sour. So for example, a Pokemon with the quiet nature will dislike the sweet flavor but like the dry flavor. Or a Pokemon with the adamant nature will like the spicy flavor but dislike the dry flavor. And then there are berries that have no use in battle, but in Emerald version, 6 of these no-effect berries were given the ability to lower a Pokemon's EVs and raise its friendship. In Gen 2, there there were berry trees of a specific type in specific spots that you couldn't change. But in Gen 3, you can plant any berry in any place where there's an open patch of soil, and they can take anywhere from 4 hours to 4 days to fully grow. Once planted, the berry will grow 4 distinct times until it is ready to be harvested, and the amount of berries yielded depends on how much you watered it. The last 3 stages of growth each have mostly unique sprites depending on the type of berry being grown as well. Berries can also be used to make Pokeblocks. What are Pokeblocks? Well, I'm glad you asked. These are another new to Gen 3 mechanic that mainly pertains to Pokemon contests. To put it very simply, feeding a Pokeblock to one of your Pokemon will improve one of its conditions: coolness, beauty, cuteness, cleverness, or toughness. These stats are used in Pokemon contests. You make them by mixing berries up in the berry blender, which can be done by yourself or actually with friends by using a link cable. This device thing will spin around, and when it points to you, you need to push A to make it spin faster, and the faster it spins, the better the Pokeblock. And the way a Pokeblock affects your Pokemon's conditions is influenced by the berries used to create it. Okay, moving on. In Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald, berries can be made into berry powder, which you can use to get herbal medicine or vitamins. And then in Generation 4, 21 new berries were added for a total of 64 different varieties. The new berries range in effects from having damage taken from a specific type of super effective move, damaging the attacker of the held berry depending on if they used a physical or special move, raising move's accuracy, and making the user's move go first within the same priority bracket. And all of the E-Reader berries were replaced by the Enigma berry, which now raises the user's HP by 25% when they're hit with a super effective move. Some of the berries' plant sprites were updated, growth times were updated, and most berries were updated to have a greater maximum yield. And hey, if you like watering berries, then Diamond and Pearl are the games for you. Soft soil can be found all around Sinnoh, like in Hoenn. But now, whenever you plant berries, the soil will begin to dry out every hour at a rate that's determined by the type of berry being planted. There are 3 stages of soil moisture: very dry, dry, and moist. For every hour that the berries are left in very dry soil, the total yield will be cut by 1/5 to a minimum of just 2. And then there's mulch you can use before you plant a berry in soil to affect the total growth time and moisture drain rate. There are 4 different types of mulch. We've got growth mulch, which will make the soil lose moisture 50% faster, but will also make the berries grow in 75% of the normal time. And then there's damp mulch, which will make the soil lose moisture 50% slower, but will make berries grow in 150% of the normal time. Stable mulch allows the fully grown berries to be harvestable for 50% longer. And finally, if gooey mulch was used, the berry plant will regrow 14 more times as opposed to the usual 9. I think I forgot to mention that, but it was like that in Gen 3 as well. Every time you harvested berries from a plant, that plant would regrow 9 more times without you having to plant any more berries. Also, in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, there is no soil in the overworld. Instead, you get a key item, the berry pot. This allows you to tend to 4 different portable patches of soil. So yeehaw, time to get farming. Now for Apricorns in Gen 4. Well, they don't actually exist in Diamond and Pearl, but they did come back for Heart Gold and Soul Silver, as they were a mechanic that was initially introduced in Gen 2. The trees that previously grew berries in Gold and Silver now grow Apricorns in these games, and they have an additional use. They can be blended into drinks. These drinks can be used to boost a Pokemon's performance during Pokeathlons. And these Pokeathlons are a contest-esque side adventure where you go through 10 unique events such as the Hurdle Dash, Relay Run, and Disc Catch with your Pokemon. And speaking of contests, let's talk about Poffins. These are essentially the Gen 4 equivalent of Pokeblocks. They're crafted using berries and are used to improve performances in contests in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. They have different effects based on the berries used and have flavors that Pokemon prefer based on their nature again. And to actually make the Poffins, just like with Pokeblocks, you do this little mini-game which can be done with friends over wireless communication, where you throw berries into this batter and have to stir them up. Though if you stir too fast, the batter will spill, and if you stir too slowly, the Poffin will burn. And as it cooks, the mixture will become thicker, so you have to adjust your stirring speed. I completely awakened the forgotten memory of this minigame by researching this. Now let's talk about what happened with berries in Generation 5 and how you plant them there. Well, I guess it's a pretty short conversation because you just can't plant berries in Black and White anymore. Game Freak decided to move berry planting to a browser-based internet companion game to Black and White, and, well, that was shut down a decade ago. So yeah, you just actually can't plant berries in that game anymore. There is no replacement. But how it did work a decade ago was you just had rows of soil to plant your berries in, and as you accumulated dream points in the dream world, you would get more rows up to a maximum of 10. Berries took 50% longer to grow than they did in Gen 4, and they still required regular watering, but you could actually water your friends' berries if you visited their dream worlds. And Apricorns don't exist in Gen 5. The next time we'll see them is in Gen 8's Isle of Armor DLC for Sword and Shield. So back to talking about berries we go. In Gen 6, 3 new types were added. One that reduces damage from a super effective fairy type move, and the other 2 raise the holder's defenses based on the type of attack they were hit with, either physical or special. In X and Y, berries could only be planted in the berry fields location. This field has 6 rows of soil with 6 spots each to plant berries. Mulches also return this gen, using a composter where you can insert a combination of 3 berries to get a certain kind of mulch. There were also some additional mechanics added to berry planting, such as having to clear your berries of bug-type Pokemon and weeds. Berries can now also mutate. If you plant specific berries next to each other, there's a chance that one plant may mutate to bear 2 different types of berries. There's also 4 new kinds of mulch, which are as follows. Boost mulch, which causes the soil to dry out in 4 hours, instead of the usual 24 hours. Rich mulch, which increases the final harvest of berries by 2. Surprise mulch, which increases the chance of a berry mutation. And amaze mulch, which does everything the past 3 mulches do. Makes the soil dry quicker, increases the final berry yield by 2, and makes mutations more likely. Another change is that berries now have 6 stages of growth before being able to be harvested, as opposed to the previous 4 stages. Growth times have also been changed so that they all fall into a multiple of 24 hours, and yields also increase significantly across the board. These final yields are influenced by how often you water it, pick weeds, and remove pest Pokemon from it. Now on to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the region where berry planting originated. Soft soil appears all throughout Hoenn, just like in the original games, and they kind of simplified berries quite a bit for these games. The only thing you do with them is watering. There are no weeds or pests, and berries are back to having 4 stages of growth. The growth time for most berries are either 16 or 32 hours, and you can't use mulch. As for Pokeblocks, they got rid of the little berry blender spinning minigame to make these, and it's just automatic. Also, if you used rarer berries, you will get a more potent version of the Pokeblock, the Pokeblock Plus. And yeah, Pokeblocks in these games are pretty similar to how they worked in Generation 3. So onwards to berries in Gen 7. There were no new berries introduced this gen, and they can only be grown on the Pokepelago's Isle of Plenty. And berries that don't have a use when used or held aren't even present in Alola, except for the Blook and Panap berries. As far as growing berries goes, things are very simple this gen. There isn't really any way to interact with them after you plant them, since they got rid of watering. The only thing you could do is develop the island to increase the harvestable amount of berries, and use Pokebeans to double the berries' growth rate for some time. Oh, also you can use berries to dye white fashion items different colors at the Festival Plaza Dye House, but yeah, that's kinda it. Then in Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, things are obviously quite different. Berries pretty much work like they do in Pokemon Go. You use them during wild Pokemon encounters. And there are only 3 different types, Raz, Nanab, and Peanup, each having a regular silver and gold variant. Okay, and in Generation 8, there is no mechanic for growing berries, so I guess that makes this gen a lot easier to cover, huh? You get berries by shaking them out of trees, and their usage, outside of eating them in held items, are tied to making curry. You can use up to 10 berries in 1 dish of curry, and these help determine its flavor, rarity, quality, and the amount of friendship that it increases. And as mentioned earlier, Apricorns come back this gen in the Isle of Armor DLC for Sword and Shield. Apricorns are also found by shaking the trees on this island. And then you can take them to this creepypasta adjacent abomination called the Cram-O-Matic. And if you feed it 4 Apricorns, it'll make you a Pokeball. Then in Legends Arceus, Apricorns come back yet again. They are once again found on trees, and you use these to craft all of your Pokeballs. By adding additional and/or alternative materials along with the Apricorns, you'll craft different kinds of Pokeballs. And that's about it for Apricorns, with them being absent from Generation 9. And things are more or less the same for berries in Gen 9 as they were in Gen 8. There is no growing mechanic, and instead you find them lying around the map by winning auctions, as Gym Challenge rerun rewards, or from Terra Raid battles. Okay, now let's move on to what was by far the most commented topic of the last video. Where was Pokemon Legends Arceus? Well, I must have just decided as I was writing out the script for part 1 that since it was such a dramatic departure from every core series Pokemon game before and after it, that I just wasn't really going to cover it much. But in hindsight, I probably should have. So here's Legends Arceus' changelog. Starting with the introduction of 7 new Pokemon, which brought the total up to 905. A brand new region, or well actually I guess a brand new version of an old region, the Hisui region, which is the Sinnoh region in ancient times. 24 new moves, which brought the total up to 865. A new colored striped version for Basculin, white striped. And Hisuian forms for 16 existing Pokemon, including Typhlosion, Decidueye, Samurott, Arcanine, Zoroark, and more. There were also new forms for both Dialga and Palkia. This is the first core series Pokemon game to have 3 Pokemon that originated from different regions as your starter. Legends Arceus is the first major step that the franchise makes towards being an open world game, though I'm not exactly sure how accurate it would be to call it one. There are sprawling regions that you're meant to traverse and explore, with Pokemon and items littering the landscape, but you can only explore these regions in order as you go through the story. So whether you classify this as an open world game or not, it certainly feels like a step in that direction and is one of the few unique things that Legends Arceus introduced that Scarlet and Violet built upon instead of throwing in the trash. Legends Arceus also immediately separates itself from its predecessors when the main task given to the player to progress through the game is to complete the Pokedex, not go through a Pokemon League. And like in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, wild Pokemon are visible on the overworld, but you interact with them in a completely different way. You don't run into Pokemon to start a battle. In fact, you don't even have to battle wild Pokemon in this game. Since most of the gameplay of Legends Arceus is focused around catching Pokemon, they made it a much more streamlined process. Before a Pokemon even notices you, you can just throw a Pokeball at it to catch it. Or if you throw one at their back, your odds of success are higher. You can even crouch walk to move more stealthily, decreasing the odds of a Pokemon noticing you. This mechanic is added because Pokemon actually respond to your presence in the game. Some species will even act aggressively and start attacking you, the player, which is pretty awesome. You even get a dedicated dodge roll action to help evade these attacks and just stay, less dead. Though, while some Pokemon will attack you on sight, others will run away or just remain neutral. And while running into wild Pokemon won't automatically activate a wild battle, you always have the option of throwing out a Pokemon from your party. Throwing one of your Pokemon at a wild Pokemon will start a battle, and this battle doesn't actually take you to a different battle scene. No, it happens right there on the spot in the overworld. The player character can even still run around and control the camera during the battle, and this is one of those changes that is so cool and doesn't sound like a huge deal, but it's hard to imagine going back. And speaking of throwing your Pokemon at wild Pokemon, aside from dodge rolling and crouching, that's another new action that's given to the player in this game: throwing stuff. You have a reticle and you use this to throw berries and items to interact with wild Pokemon, throw Pokeballs to catch wild Pokemon, which, by the way, is a really fun mechanic I thought, and as mentioned, throwing out your own Pokemon to battle wild Pokemon or collect materials from the environment. And you can actually die. Or, no, I'm sorry, this is Pokemon. I mean, you can actually black out if you take too many attacks from wild Pokemon, and you'll be returned to the last camp you visited, losing some items in the process. There are the big, bad, red, glowy-eyed Pokemon that spawn on the overworld, known as Alpha Pokemon. They will always act aggressively towards you and have increased stats, though when you catch one, its stats will revert back to normal. Tall grass serves a unique function in Legends Arceus. It makes the player less visible to wild Pokemon as you move through it. You get access to the ability to ride 5 different Pokemon as you please with a command. You can ride on Whirldeer, who moves fast and jump good. You can ride Ursaluna, who excels at finding hidden items. You can swim through water by riding on Basculegion. Riding on Sneasler allows you to climb up walls. And Hisuian Braviary allows you to fly through the air as you ride on its back. And for the first time in the series, if all of your Pokemon are knocked out during a wild battle, the game doesn't actually end. You're just left to your own devices to survive in the world without any Pokemon. And where Legends Arceus really tries to flex its action RPG muscle is during the boss battles with noble Pokemon. These Pokemon, who are worshipped by the people of Hisui, have been sent into a frenzy by a strange lightning strike. During these boss battles, you must avoid the attacks that these Pokemon make against you, the trainer, using the dodge mechanic. And you, in return, must throw special balms at it to calm it down. And when the noble Pokemon drops its guard, you can engage it in a classic Pokemon battle to lower its HP even more. Moving on, the Pokédex works quite differently in this game. You don't just fill out a Pokemon's entry by catching it once. You have to fulfill individual research tasks for each Pokemon, which include, but are not limited to, catching multiple, KOing multiple, seeing them use certain moves, and catching different sized ones. Evolution works differently in this game. Once a Pokemon is able to evolve, it doesn't happen immediately. Instead, you are notified that it can evolve, and you can activate said evolution at any point from the menu. And Pokemon that evolved via leveling up, but also required a sub-condition to be met, such as high friendship, now don't have the level requirement. For example, Pokemon that used to evolve after leveling up with high friendship now only need the high friendship, not the level up. Pokemon that used to evolve only by being traded now can also evolve by being exposed to the linking cord item. The means by which Pokemon learn moves is also different. Instead of a Pokemon immediately having to learn a move on level up, the Pokemon will now get the idea for the move. And you can access a Pokemon's ideas for moves at any time outside of battle, and choose which of these moves you want your Pokemon to have at any time. You can also change a Pokemon's nickname whenever you want. There were some mechanics from previous games that were cut in Legends Arceus though, such as abilities, held items, breeding, eggs, and Pokerus. But mechanics such as crafting were added. As long as you have the materials and a recipe for a particular item, you can craft it at a workbench or at any location if you have the crafting kit. And due to the fact that this game takes place in ancient times, Pokeballs have a somewhat dramatically different aesthetic. With a wooden bottom half, this metal kind of buckle thing where the button usually is, and a valve on the top that shoots out out steam whenever you successfully catch a Pokemon. And I've got bad news for the Pokemon economy bros. Your items only sell for a quarter of their purchase price as opposed to the usual half price. Alright, now let's talk about the actual mechanics of battling since they've changed quite a lot. I already mentioned that Pokemon no longer have access to held items or abilities, but the turn order that your Pokemon take during battles is also different. In previous games, at the beginning of a turn, the faster Pokemon would move and then the slower Pokemon would move, assuming no priority was used. But in Legends Arceus, only one Pokemon acts per turn, and there's a menu that displays the order for which the battling Pokemon get to take a turn for the next 6 turns. This order is primarily determined by a Pokemon's speed stat, and due to this system, Pokemon can even take multiple consecutive turns in some cases. Another new battle system that works in tandem with the new turn order is the move mastery mechanic. Pokemon can master their moves by leveling up, and once a move is mastered, a Pokemon gets access to 2 new versions of that move. A strong style version, which increases the move's power, accuracy, and other effects, but it lowers your action time, meaning the opposing Pokemon might be able to get 2 turns in a row on you. The other style is the agile style, which lowers the move's power and other effects, but raises your action time, meaning you may be able to get 2 attacks off in a row yourself. Speaking of action time, there are some moves that interact uniquely with it even on their non-mastered version. Many status moves, such as Swords Dance, Bulk Up, and Focus Energy, decrease your action time, meaning you'll get to take another action quicker. The same is true for priority moves such as Quick Attack, Mach Punch, and Bullet Punch. Conversely, moves that previously took multiple turns to use, such as Hyper Beam and Giga Impact, now increase your action time, meaning you may start to fall behind in the turn order. And moving on, status conditions have changed as well. Freeze and Sleep are removed entirely, being replaced with the new conditions Frostbite and Drowsy. Drowsy causes the Pokemon to fail to move sometimes, while also increasing the damage it takes from direct attacks. And Frostbite does damage repeatedly, like Burn and Poison, while also reducing the inflicted Pokemon's special attack. And important to note, Burn, Poison, and Frostbite do damage each time the affected Pokemon gets to move, not after every turn. Status conditions now automatically dissipate after so many turns. Also, having a status condition does not make you immune to other status conditions, it will just replace the one you previously had. For example, if a Pokemon is burned, it can still be inflicted with Frostbite, but if this happens, the burn is replaced by the Frostbite. Flinching as a mechanic is entirely removed from Legends Arceus. Instead, moves that cause flinching now lowers the target's action speed. Stat-changing moves work differently as well. Stat-raising moves that previously only raised physical or special stats now raise both. For example, Swords Dance now boosts attack and special attack as opposed to just attack, but these buffs do wear off after a couple of turns. Also, stat buffs don't stack anymore. If, for example, you tried to Swords Dance while you still had a Swords Dance active, it would just extend the amount of time the buffs are active instead of buffing you more. Next, they got rid of the mechanic where you can switch out your Pokemon after KOing one. It's possible for you to have a battle against multiple Pokemon, but you yourself can never actually battle with 2 Pokemon on your side of the field. Also worth noting, Legends Arceus is the first and so far only mainline Pokemon game where you can't actually battle other human players. Though you can still trade with other people, but only other people who have Legends Arceus. And that's the video. Thank you so much for sticking around till the end. This is definitely the most time I've put into a single video, so seriously, I appreciate it. If you missed part 1 to this Every Change in Pokemon series, I'll figure out right now how to put it up on the screen, but it'll also be in the description of the video. Alright, and that's all I got, so have a great day, and don't forget to leave a comment telling me about all the shit I missed. Peace.